Hi everyone, morning team. Welcome to the 90th Learn with Lorna. I'll wait for a second as usual for people to join us. So I was going to say it's always the way to see who says hello first. So, hi John, hi Penny. So welcome to the 90th Learn with Lorna. This week we're looking at the subject of sending cards and greetings. My name, as you will know, is Lorna. I'm the Community Engagement Officer for the Highland Archive Service. The Highland Archive Service has 4 centres. So we have the Highland Archive and Registration Centre in Inverness, the Nucleus, Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick, Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William, and Skye and Lochalsh Archive Centre in Portree. So really fortunate to have those 4 buildings that make up the Highland Archive Service. This series, as you'll know if you've watched before, is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But as I always say, if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. And I know that when you say things week in, week out, it maybe carries a little bit less meaning. It sounds like it carries a little bit less meaning, but it truly is appreciated. So this week, I'm continuing our December theme of winter and Christmas, but looking at, rather than specific things to do with Christmas, looking at things we do more or think about more at this time of year. So I've covered going to church by looking at the story of the old high church. And last week we looked at shops and shopping. And this week we're going to look at the subject of sending cards and greetings. Something, as I mentioned, that's probably much more prolific at this time of year. When I started to research for this, I was looking online and found that apparently in the UK alone, we send nearly 1 billion Christmas cards every year in the UK alone. So I don't know what that would be globally. That's digital and physical cards. And they mean a huge amount to people to receive cards and letters. I have received cards and letters and emails and even presents from some of you this year and last year. And I'm so incredibly grateful. I can't tell you what it means to get the messages and that sense of value of being in someone's thoughts and mattering enough for them to want to contact you. It's really, really lovely. So thank you for that. And we've done this for centuries. We have sent messages of affection, as well as messages to do with business, to do with state, and to do with officialdom. And that's been done, of course, either by post overseas, by post internally, or by hand. And the story of sending and receiving letters and greetings in this way is full of all sorts of things. So it's full of individual events, of course. So we send cards for weddings, for birthdays, for condolences. There are times in global history when things have happened that have made the receipt of cards and messages even more meaningful than usual. So, for instance, the obvious one, of course, is during the First World War and the Second World War, and I'll come back to that in a second. And there have been times even where the post or the lack of post has contributed to a whole area's future, a whole area's community. That's something, of course, it seems to be always a current subject, how central a post office or a postal service can be to a community. And so I thought I would start by a quick overview of the postal system in Scotland, using a document called An Historical Summary of the Post Office in Scotland, compiled from authentic records and documents by T.B. Lang, and that was written in 1856. And this is how it opens. The earliest records that can be found relating to the conveyance of dispatches or letters in Scotland do not date earlier than the 14th and 15th centuries. In these early records, special messengers for the conveyance of the king's dispatches and correspondence are called nunci or cursores, but the information as to their mode of travelling and regulations for their guidance is imperfect and limited. So we know that they were there, but we don't really know the practicalities of it. Messengers of this description were also employed to convey dispatches from foreign countries, for which they received gratuities on their arrival at the Scottish court. About the year 1500, the name of post is found to apply to messengers travelling with the utmost rapidity then attainable in charge of dispatches. So the word post was applied to the person rather than the object, if you know what I mean. On the 1st of April 1515, the English envoy in Scotland wrote from Stirling to Henry VIII. This Friday, when I came home to dinner, I received your most honourable letter by post, dated at your mansion, Greenwich, 26th of March. These letters, which appear to have occupied 5 or 6 days in transit from Greenwich to Stirling, must have been conveyed by one of these special court messengers. And it was not long after this period that the municipal corporations and private persons of consequence also introduced messengers of this description. So you get there a really clear insight to the fact that it starts at the very top. So it starts with the king and the royal court, and then gradually rolls out into persons of consequence and to the corporations. So very much associated with power, with wealth, with the ability to afford to be able to do this. In 1635, then, a public post was established to carry communication between London and Edinburgh twice a week, but it quickly became unreliable, and often letters were lost or stolen. And then carrying on through the 1600s, 1650s and 60s, there were various pieces of legislation enacted. And of course, this is before the Act of Union, so it's slightly different in England and Scotland and in the other home nations, depending on what was happening. But in the 1660s, the General Letter Office, which would go on to become the General Post Office, was established in England. In 1669, the Privy Council passed an act for creating a footpost between Edinburgh and Inverness once a week. So this is the first time, as far as I'm aware, that we start to see Inverness specifically mentioned in the legislation. And really extraordinarily, we have all the costs for that, which is just amazing. So the costs were calculated by how many sheets of paper there were and the distance that they were carried. So for instance, a 1-sheet letter carried for 60 miles was 3 Scots shillings. And that was the equivalent to about 1 pence in sterling. So quite extraordinary, I think, that we can know that information. 1695, we get the GPO, the Public General Post Office, established in Edinburgh for the maintaining of mutual correspondence and the preventing of the many inconveniences that happen by private posts. So that's a continuation of that theme of moving away from private carriers and onto a public system. And the Postmaster General for Scotland at that point was charged with establishing posts all over Scotland in convenient places. Interesting that through the whole of this up until the 1800s, and I'll come back to that in a second, it's the receiver that's paying the post as well. So when they're establishing those posts, those people carrying the post, when they're handing it to the recipient is the one paying. Following the Act of Union, 1707, 1710, the Post Office, I loved this when I came across this, the Post Office of Scotland united with the Post Office of England, Ireland and America, not Wales, America, under one Postmaster General. I don't know what was happening with Wales at that point. They may well have been involved as well, but I just thought it was so funny that Scotland, England, Ireland and America. But of course, that is all well before the Wars of Independence. At this point, we've got a Deputy Postmaster General who's overseeing Scotland. What I found really interesting, it's possibly unsurprising, and maybe some of you will have some recollection of some of these things, but interesting that as new technology started to appear through the 18 and 1900s, the General Post Office stated a claim over them. So telegraphs and telephones, as they became more and more common, and I'm not suggesting you'll remember when these were invented, by the way, but you'll probably remember that connection between the GPO and the telephones. And apparently their argument for that was that as there was a sender and a receiver of a call or a telegram or a letter, they automatically had a claim into that. But of course, they gradually lost that monopoly as competitors emerged and things changed. But I thought it was interesting that as we tend to think of the postal system in the UK, certainly as kind of connected loosely to government. There's an official kind of remit there. But there's always been a history of public versus private, of competition, of technology shaping the story of it as well. So just really, really interesting. And apparently, thank you, Fiona. I knew that someone would say that they remembered the post office and the phones being run together. So into the 1700s, and we'll come back to the 1800s in a second, but apparently when a Mr. James Anderson took on the role of Postmaster General in Scotland in 1715, there were no horse posts in Scotland. They were just foot runners. Now, you might remember 1715 being a key date in the story of the country, key date in the Jacobite story. And on the 16th of September 1715, the postmaster of Inverness wrote to the Postmaster General to say that the post had been taken prisoner, so the post, of course, being the person, and that the bag containing the letters had been taken in Inverness, in Dingwall, and in Dornoch. And so you start to see the real the danger of being working in the post at this time. The postman's been taken prisoner. They temporarily put horse posts into place to transport the news more quickly and to oversee that, but that only lasted for a short time, and they went back to having foot posts. But we see this right through our court collections, through our Angus McKechnie collection, which I know I've mentioned in passing before, a huge collection of really interesting documents from mainly the 1700s. But we see, for instance, a 1705 letter of complaint by George Mayne, who was the Postmaster General, against John MacDonald, Donald Glennoch, James Clark, and John Ross for usurping the post office function in Inverness by carrying letters themselves. And as I say, the court papers are full of 17 and 1800s references to mail robberies, to people both within the postal service stealing the mail and to people outside holding up the mail. So a real insight into how dangerous the profession was. By the 1740s, there were 106 post towns in Scotland, and by the 1750s, we started to see some horse relays coming in. And there were some private carriers, but technically they weren't really allowed. 1770s, we see a few changes. The stagecoach comes in between Edinburgh and London, and the first penny post in Edinburgh, which was just city deliveries and pickups, but that quite quickly was kind of taken over into the General Post Office because they saw the potential for that. But it was really 1840 that we see some big changes coming in. The creation of the stamp, paid for by the sender, so that's the penny black, so that enables the person at the receiving the letter no longer has it used to be that the receiver would have to pay the letter. They could either say, no, I'm just not paying for that, so you can take it away again. And now the sender is paying for a stamp. And also the creation alongside that of the penny post, so a uniform standardization of the cost. So you're no longer paying per sheet and per distance, you're paying a much more straightforward system. And becomes much more affordable. And this coincided with the flourishing of Christmas cards, but I'll come back to that towards the end. But it's just interesting, as you can see, that that change right through that history of the post office being associated with politics, with conflict, with competitors, with technology. So the invention of the stagecoach, the stamp, telegraphs, so on, all of that's all intertwined right through to, of course, the internet. And in fact, when I was looking in researching for this, there's a fantastic image on Ambala, and I really would encourage you after this, if you're interested in the subject, to go and have a look and search the word post in Ambala, because there's all sorts of great images of rural post offices and all sorts of things. But one of the stories on there is of the story of Staffin sub-postmistress Annie Gillis, so that's in Skye. And she ran that post office for 61 years. She was the longest serving sub-postmistress in the UK. And she worked from a time when a horse and carriage delivered the mail, right through to the introduction of computers and mobile phone top-up cards, which I just find completely extraordinary. There can be few times where you've covered such a substantial change in your lifetime as that. Apparently, when she had to learn how to work the computer, she said, oh, it's just another thing to learn, so that's fine. But what she did note right throughout was the importance of the post office to the centre of a community. Now, that's a kind of very whistle-stop tour of where we've come from in terms of the history of the postal system. But of course, in our collections at the Highland Archive Service, we have many thousands of letters and cards and written communications in our collections. It's possibly, and if any of my colleagues are watching, feel free to correct me, but it's possibly the most substantial part of our holdings. There are letters and greetings cards and so on from local people to local people, nationally, internationally, letters that have been on ships, that have been in planes, that have been on horseback, that have been transported across the country and across the world. And just thousands and thousands of voices across the centuries. And you'll know by now, if you watch me regularly, that I suffer from an overactive imagination. And sometimes I walk into the strong room and I just hear all these muffled voices in the boxes. And I think, imagine if I take these lids off these archive boxes and all these people writing letters and talking to each other, all their voices will burst out. You're never alone in a strong room. And the letters contain all sorts of things, people writing to family members about local news and gossip, marking happy times, so marriage or birth of a child, or sad times such as a bereavement. But I thought I would start with some of the really general ones. Informational, cards and postcards used like text. So you might remember some time ago I spoke about different forms of transport and travel. And there was a message, a very small document in the Baillie of Dunane collection from the 1700s, where the family member wrote to his father and just said, basically, just to let you know, I've arrived at Queensferry. So just a very, very quick, almost like a text. And there are loads like that in our collections that maybe don't contain a huge, vast amount of information, but they're very representative of the way people were using post. I've got loads in my own family collections, absolutely dozens of them. So, for instance, in our Taylor of Munlochy collection, which I'll come back and do a talk on in the new year, we have a postcard dating from the 27th of August 1909. It shows Not Been School on the front, so often these postcards are photographic, so there's a huge amount of photographic postcards and a huge craze for postcard sending as well. And it gives the news to a Mr. A. Ross of Burnside Cottage, Kilduffle Road, Inverness. And it just says on it, a PC to let you know that we're all wonderful well. I hope you are the same. Got the bottle all right, also the postcard with thanks. I was at the show but could not go anywhere for I had to attend the foal all day. We'll tell you all when you come down. Love to all, from all. So you get that feeling there. It's a very typical message, giving information about local events. It probably is talking about the Black Isle show, some general chat. We're all well, hope you're all well. There's a lovely one in Lochaber, which is a picture in our Lochaber Archive Centre, which is a picture of a beautiful view of Malig in 1904. And all it says on it is, have spent a glorious day here lying on the grass doing nothing. Wonderful. Another one from our Skye and Lochaber Archive Centre, sent by someone on board HMS Nidad, which was at that point moored at Broadford in Skye. And he's writing to a Miss M. Buckler, Bowland, Southsea, Hampshire. And it says, Dear M, sorry have not been able to answer letter before. Many thanks for card. We'll try and write later. Hope you're quite well. B. And what I found interesting about that one, as I say, it's very, there's not a huge amount of information. Basically, it gives the information about the location of a ship. But it's a really good example of how the post went from being something hugely expensive and exclusive, where we were talking at the beginning about, Henry VIII being able to write letters and pretty much nobody else. And we've now come to a point in the First World War where he's able to write a postcard that literally just says, I'm sending you a card to say I'll send you a letter. So it's very indicative of the way the system changed. Incidentally, another one that's in our Skye and Lochalsh collection is a picture of showing the mail boat at Broadford in about late 1920s, early 1930s. Because, of course, transporting mail to our island was a whole other step in that journey. So There would be boats or ships, and then later planes. Some great pictures in Umballa of planes taking letters to the islands, so do have a look at those. And in some instances, notably in St Kilda, letters would be sealed in a tin, then sealed in a wooden box and attached to a sheep's bladder because that would float, and then thrown into the water at the right tide to be carried, hopefully, to Lewis, where it would be picked up by a regular mail system. Now, of course, we hold letters and cards. I'm talking there about the kind of general ones. We hold letters and cards that talk about specific occasions. So, in our wonderful Macpherson collection, we hold celebratory, congratulatory cards from all sorts of people to Sir Tommy Macpherson on the occasion of his knighthood. In the Inverness Field Club collection, there's telegrams from the Queen, congratulating them on the centenary of the Field Club. So, there's all sorts of things like that, messages to James and Evelyn Barron, congratulating them on their engagement, which I'll do a talk on next year, and letters of condolences to Hester Cameron on the news of Alan Cameron's death in the First World War. That includes notes advising her of his death and cards and messages of condolence bringing comfort to her. So we are by nature a communicative species. We like to share with other people, whether that's good news, bad news, sympathy, support. And of course, World War I and World War II were times when perhaps more than any other time, those letters, cards, and messages and greetings were needed and appreciated and absolutely vital. And our collections have loads of examples of this. We have field postcards that really do little more than just confirm that a person is still alive. But to be honest, that's probably the main thing you would want to hear. So there's not a vast amount of information coming across them. Of course, there was censoring, but also these are formulaic postcards. You're just ticking a box to say I'm still alive. But that's really the main message. There are postcards from prisoner of war camps. They can be quite distressing to look at, not really because of the content, because again, of course, they're heavily censored, but because of the very black and white nature of seeing something addressed from Kriegsgefangenlager, which is prisoner of war camp, or a notation that this is a letter being sent by a prisoner of war. So, for instance, William John Wilson, who I possibly have spoken about in the past, was serving with the Gordon Highlanders when he was taken prisoner in 1918 near Cambrai during the Second Battle of the Somme. And he was confirmed as missing by postcards, and then an official postcards dated from the 29th of March 1918 confirmed that he had been taken prisoner. So at least you're hearing that he's alive, but he's a prisoner. But that's telegrams or postcards that are confirming those pieces of information. And then on the 21st of April 1918, his wife Barbara received his first postcard written from a prisoner of war camp in Munich, in Munster. And this is what he's written on it. My dearest Bab, this being my first opportunity to write you since the past 3 weeks, no doubt you will be feeling very anxious about me. But never mind, darling. Let this PC satisfy you that I must say, darling, I'm in the best of health. Also, I've had a splendid time since I was taken prisoner, which is a month tomorrow. Had plenty of travelling and no work to do. But now that I'm settled down here, I'm starting work, and so I will be all right. Well, darling, there'll be no use of you sending me parcels, as I will get plenty off our Red Cross Society in due time. But you could see about getting some cigarettes sent. I will write you a letter first Sunday, as we are only allowed to write once a week. So let my mother know every time you get word from me. Also give me all the news about home and about Alec and Dick, with my kindest love to you all at home and sweet love to yourself, Willie. So there's some things unsaid there because of the censoring system. There's some things I don't know whether he would have had really a splendid time or if he's saying that as to reassure his wife. But certainly what you do get is the evidence of the restriction on communication. So he's only allowed to send one reassurance, he's only allowed to send one message a week, and therefore this has to make sure you speak to everybody and tell everybody else I'm fine. But there is an awareness, even in that system, even when you're in enemy hands, of the importance of communication and the importance of reassuring people at home. And also that request for sending him news of home. I don't know if you remember when I spoke about on the week about migration. That was a very strong theme in those letters as well, of people who've emigrated to the other side of the world saying, please send me news about home. I need to keep a foot there. There's several good things about William Wilson's story. One is he was taken prisoner in 1918, so he was quite close to the end of the war. And also, we know that he got home safely and lived to celebrate his golden wedding with his wife. So, of course, sending and receiving post hugely increased during both World Wars, and I've spoken about the huge difference that this made both to the troops on the front and to the family at home. And I've spoken about this over various weeks. You'll maybe remember during the James Mowat story that it was getting a message back to his parents that was the thing that reassured them that he was still alive. And in fact, during World War I, there was an increase in post in all sorts of ways. Not for the first time, but unusually in St Kilda. I've spoken before there about St Kilda throwing their mail into the sea. But there was an increase of mail and food deliveries to St Kilda during the First World War because there was a naval detachment on Herta, which is the main island. And the withdrawal of this system of delivering post and food, that it kind of collapsed after the war. It stopped happening. And of course, there were other issues on St Kilda, and illness and various other things. But that withdrawal of the post was one of the things as well that contributed to the island's evacuation in 1930. Because, as I say, we are social creatures. Now, of course, all of the sending and receiving of post during the war required additional resources and infrastructure, just at a time where the workforce was being depleted by being taken out to fight. And I wanted to share this phenomenal extract from the Inverness Courier of the 29th of December 1916, which is available on Umballa if you want to have a look. Inverness Post Office, it's headed. Work in every department in the post office had been very heavy before Christmas. The parcels depot probably had never been called upon before to deal with so enormous an amount of parcels. The great calls on the staff have been due to other causes than the extra pressure of Christmastide, heavy as that has been. The work had to be undertaken by a depleted staff, for owing to the war, no less than 40 of the members of the regular male staff are on military service. Their places have been filled to a considerable extent by females, and it is stated that they have admirably performed the work. A few soldiers have helped to relieve the pressure in some departments. The local Christmas rush of letters was not quite so heavy as in former years, and the many uniformed lady posts quickly got through their deliveries. The collection of letters and parcels from the branch offices was speedily executed by means of a motor lorry. On the past 4 days, special postal trains were run from Inverness to Perth on Friday and Saturday. The excellent arrangements of Mr. George McLaren, postmaster, assisted by Mr. Charles Mackenzie, superintendent, tended to smooth working during the extra pressure. The number of parcels sent abroad constituted a fresh record. These were mainly for soldiers and prisoners of war. The pressure of business at the post office counter was abnormally heavy. The lady clerks were able to deal satisfactorily with the large crowds that filled the office, especially on Saturday. Isn't that nice? How well the ladies coped with every aspect of that. But it's an interesting one, and that brings us to the subject of Christmas cards, and particularly, of course, a very busy time for a postal service around the world. And I just thought that extract there was probably painfully familiar to anybody working in the postal service at the moment. Those references to a depleted workforce with an increased workload due to a global situation. Just another reminder that archives never really date. They continue to reflect the current as well sometimes. Of course, we have Christmas cards and Christmas letters in our collections, in our school records, in our county collections, but of course, most obviously in our family and personal collections. Christmas cards are a relatively recent tradition in comparison with some of the other things that we do at Christmas. There are sporadic examples of cards being sent from the 1600s onwards, and certainly letters with references to best wishes for the new year and so on. But like so many Christmas things, really, it is the Victorian era that really brings it to the fore. So it's likely that the first Christmas cards were commissioned around about 1843 and were popularised by Queen Victoria. They often showed that image, I'm sure you'll be familiar with, that classic Victorian Christmas card, flowers and fairies and children and animals and people doing kind works for other people, things like that. And as well as those big swags of greenery or hanging greenery, the reason for that being to symbolise the end of winter and the coming of spring. And as we've seen with railways and Highland tourism and all sorts of other things, as soon as Queen Victoria is on the bandwagon, it takes off, and Christmas cards and Christmas traditions, some Christmas traditions are the same. So in a very short time after this, there were Christmas cards readily available, commonly sent and received, and then subsequently cut up to be used in scrapbooks. And we have examples of that in our collections as well, of those Christmas cards being cut and stuck into scrapbooks. And we have loads of Christmas cards across our collections. Many of the collections I've spoken about in the past, for instance, Duncan Macpherson, William Wilson, various other ones, we have Christmas cards within those as well. Many that were sent home during both wars. They often contain patriotic images. Often they're sometimes in black and white because, of course, there'd be the cost, the issue of paper and so on. And so sometimes they're quite like an outline maybe of a soldier, something like that. But often those beautiful embroidered postcards that you'll probably be familiar with. And many of them write messages to their family thanking them for food parcels, such as this 1915 letter, Christmas letter from the Davidson collection in Nucleus. So it's dated the 5th of January 1915, and it says, "My dearest Gretty, I did not get you written to yesterday, love. I was very busy all day. We were out for a route march from 9 a.m. till 2:15 p.m. Had a lot of things to see to when I came back, and just as I was about to sit down to write you a message came in that the general wanted to see me at his billet, so off I had to go. When I came back, I found your 4 parcels waiting for me, and I dived greedily into them just like a bairn. Many thanks for the scones, butter, books, meal, puddings, and clothes, all of which are very much appreciated and being enjoyed today. Wednesday afternoon is to be a holiday while we're in rest billets, so I have some peace this afternoon, or I thought I would, but I have to go away to a lecture on the Battle of Lewes at 4 p.m, so we will not have the afternoon to ourselves after all." So those messages coming back of saying thank you for the parcels, thank you for parcels that probably meant more than they have done at any other point in time. But of course, we also hold cards from peacetime. So there is one sent from Tasmania in 1927, which I love because I think it keeps alive that tradition of showing off what you've done in a Christmas letter. "My dear old friend, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I often think of old times and of yourself and of Mrs. Stewart. You will see below the Duke and Duchess of York admiring a tame wallaby in our city park. I had intimate conversations with both of them. Kindest regards." I love that because it's obviously just a wee bit of an update and a bit of news. But like I say, it does carry on that tradition of look what I've done. And then, of course, we have cards going in to other decades up until the 1990s, things designed by school pupils. And when we come to those, we have a lot more colour, a lot more glitter, a lot more cut and paste, and they're really cheery. And if you search Christmas cards on our Facebook page, you'll certainly find some of those as well. I will stop talking before I overrun any more, but I hope you've enjoyed finding out a little bit about some of the cards and greetings that we have in our collections. And of course, we've covered loads more over the course of these 90 episodes. Communication, letters, correspondence is something that covers many of the subjects that I've talked about over the last, 15 years or however long it's been we've been doing these. As I say, if you're interested in the subject, do have a look at Ambala. There's some great images on there. And next week I'll be looking at a linked subject of stories of friendship, looking through references in correspondence and diaries and so on to the importance of those strong friendships. So just to finish off, just to say that our newsletter went out last week. So if you are a subscriber to that, you'll have got it. If you would like to be a subscriber, then just send us a message and we will add you onto that. I have advertised January and February's Learn with Lorna's. So please share those and have a wee look at them, see what you think about the themes. We've advertised our themes for next year as well, quite excited about those. And our classes will be starting on the 21st of January. These are Archives for Beginners classes, so we'll cover all subjects from education records, church records, crime, family and estate papers, all sorts of different things. So if you want to find out more about those, you can book onto 4 or you can book onto 8, then do get in touch with us for that as well. I'm seeing your question, Stuart. My eye chart behind me is actually a light, which I'm very proud of, but if I put it on, it'll just blind the camera, so I won't do it. So yes, if you want to know more about the classes or anything else that we do, then please just get in touch. And thank you again to those of you who have sent cards and sent messages and Christmas messages and presents. I can't tell you how much appreciated it is. I'm really very, very grateful. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. And I'll see you next week.